great pleasure for me to moderate this session with these distinguished people here. We worked together for a long time, and the session really is meant to cover government preparedness and response for Hurricane Island and the progress in disaster management post-Hurricane Island. But I think for us to really get a quick, and we don't have that much time, a quick picture of all of what I've just said, I need to give you a 97-second scenario of what it was like prior to Hurricane Island. And we could take you back some 28 years, maybe to 1986. And that would have been the period previous to or before Hurricane Gilbert. At that time, the hurricane preparedness information was included on two full-scale, they call it two legal-sized sheets. I'm sure Johnny and Deanna Sam remembers that. The Weather Service got much of its information from the Met Office in Jamaica, which Sam made some reference to earlier. And sometimes the information did not come through, sometimes it was late, and therefore it made it difficult, or put some degree of difficulty in it for us, for the people trying to look ahead to see what needed to be done. We had no television, no live television that was. I believe when Gilbert approached, there were a few satellite systems up and running, but there were no live television. Radio Cayman had come into operation in 1976 and probably had the only frequent daily international regional weather updates through the United Press International and AP Weather Service, or Weather News Service, which updated 2 times daily. I can recall standing beside the UP teletype machine, waiting for the report to come off to take over the classes with the chief secretary at the time to see if there was any action that needed to be taken. Radio Cayman in late May annually always started running daily information on hurricane preparedness, and I think we initiated that probably in 1978. And a little operation here to that process, which tried to make its way into the whole process. And I call it a political operation. Sam made reference to no political boundaries. Well, there are political boundaries no matter where you're operating. But, and I'll just relate this to you briefly. The political at the time thought that the information that we were dispensing was not, or should not be, because they were afraid that it was scaring people. And I was called over to the classes one afternoon, Tuesday afternoon, after Cayman, or Exco at the time, and this was related to me that Mr. Foster was then chief secretary. He looked at me and said, Bossy, I don't think this is wise. He said, what do we need to do? I said, well, we know what we need to do. He said, okay, go do what you need to do. In essence, they wanted us to reduce the frequency and almost stopped. We went back, we pulled it back about 2 days and then increased the frequency of the preparedness. So it just went on from there. But well, I just mentioned that in passing. The basic service I just described was the process up through 1987 when Gilbert came along. And I think that it could be considered to have been the first meeting of the modernized, improved hurricane preparedness for the Cayman Islands, when quite a number of the people on this panel got together in the studios of Radio Cayman on the eve of Gilbert. And through the technology that we had at that, connected the whole panel where I was there to the National Hurricane Center in Jamaica, and this was in Miami, and this related back to not getting the proper information through the Jamaica Met Office. And they were able to speak directly with the Hurricane Director, or National Hurricane Center Director, which I believe was Dr. Sheets at the time. And a lot of really good information came across from that. And thus, I think the realization, hey, we need to update this whole plan and get things going. And under the direction of Donnie and Mr. Ryan and Kirkland Nixon. Immediately after that, the National Hurricane Plan was updated and from the 2 pages to quite a comprehensive document to be followed. So that brings us to really where we look at the preparedness for Hurricane Ivan. And I think that I'll ask Mr. Ebanks, Johnny, just to give us a little 6 to 7 second spill on that, so what he remembers is of it. You can share the mics with someone.
Of where we were in terms of preparedness, pre-Ivan?
Pre-Ivan, yes.
Well, I think good afternoon, everyone. I think the synopsis you've given up to how we evolved is very accurate. Certainly, Gilbert was a huge opportunity for us to stimulate activity in regard to preparedness. You're fortunate when you escape, and certainly we escaped with Gilbert, but there was a very serious storm that, in that case, impacted Jamaica much more severe than impacted us. But for those of us who, had the concern and the desire to see Cayman move along in terms of its preparedness, you have to seize those opportunities when the community has been jolted. And certainly I give a lot of credit to Kirkland, and Kirkland's been I'm sitting here today. Cayman owes much to Kirkland Nixon in terms of his drive and his persistence in moving us along. His role at the fire station gave him a bit more freedom than some of the others of us who might seem much more busy. But Kirkland always put good use, and he was very much the glue and the driver and the one who kept things moving along. So I think, the development of the plan, the coming together on a regular basis, the simulation exercises, even I see Max here, Max back then I was in public works, and Max was heavily involved both in launching our sheltering exercise, but also in launching an exercise to go into the buildings that we had been designating as shelters take out sockets, look at connections of roofs, retrofit with modern hardware, all those sort of things, build on storage, build on the generator rooms, and of course, I laugh because back then our concept was that we wanted generators to run standby power for pumps, for water supply, well water, system water, and to run lighting. And of course, you've seen in the last 20 years or so how that's evolved into where people think we need to run. We install generators to have air conditioned shelters in different temperature zones. So.
Okay, an important factor in any disaster, of course, is water. And maybe we can ask the doctor here to tell us a little bit about how the water authority prepared for these emergencies.
Good evening, everyone, and I appreciate being here to share my experience with all of these very well-experienced ladies and gentlemen here on this panel. For the Water Authority, of course, water is very, very essential for everyone to have. And we have a bit of a vulnerability here in Cayman Islands because our pipelines are laid in many areas along the coast. And if you have seen the pictures from Ivan, if you weren't here, you will see that a lot of our coastlines along the south, the Breakers area, Eastern area, did have significant damage. And burying the pipelines 3 feet and deeper did not mitigate against that. Some of these lines were significantly damaged. Therefore, people will question why do we turn off the water, which is part of our preparedness plan, is at a particular stage we do turn off our distribution system. If we had not done that, the water that has been stored in many of our reservoirs would drain and we would not have water for the restoration and recovery. It is better to be without for a shorter period of time than to have lost the storage that we have. So that's one of the things that many people experience in Ireland. Again, besides that, we encourage people to ensure that they have significant storage in their own homes, whether it is in containers or you build an emergency cistern or you have a cistern already, that you have some capacity to take care of your own selves in the event that the public water supply has to be put on hold for a period of time. For the Water Authority, we did learn many lessons from Ireland, and my experience prior to Ireland was Gilbert, and I thought Gilbert was pretty bad. And with Ireland, we anticipated it would be quite serious after hearing what had happened in Bermuda when it was a much weaker storm. So we did many different things, even to the extent of taking photos of all of our facilities prior to, so we have a lot of before and after photos, which helped us significantly with insurance claims, etc. But there were still things that we did not expect. For instance, the storm surge that did impact our facilities and buildings in some areas quite significantly. And we have taken measures to try to mitigate against that occurring again. I'm sure I've spoken long enough. Mr. Banks, may want to
I think there was a good scenario there of what the preparations were for Ireland and Gilbert. Did we have a central water supply system in Gilbert?
Just barely.
Barely.
Yeah, because the public water supply in the Georgetown area commenced in February of 1988. So there was a very, very small distribution system. Of course, Cayman Water Company, which serves the western part of the island from the Dixie Cemetery, their system was already in place. To be honest, I can't really recall.
Yeah, it was in place, I think, alongside Mile Beach, but it was not in place in the past cemetery in West Bay.
Correct.
No.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, forecasting weather, what are we going to see, what can we expect, and that was where Mr. Fred Sample came in. And Fred, you can give us a little synopsis of how that was handled, and some of the tools that we had to work with at the time, compared to what is available now.
Okay, thank you very much, Doctor. Now, it's hard for me to talk about that because there have been so many bad things.
But it's seconds.
But good things also came out of it because it showed us where we were short and weak in certain areas, and we tried to upgrade. Because during Ireland, the building where the Met Office is up to now was flooded. We had to go to the fire station, separated from the fire station, and there was limited information. That was what was happening, the limited information. Jamaica, which is ahead of us, got hit, and we could not see anything for ourselves, so we had to communicate directly by phone with the Hurricane Center in Miami to get the latest information on the storm. So we plotted, and that was what we were doing with the Cayman and the public. Our communication had gone. So we just had one cell phone, or I should say satellite phone, which we used to communicate to the Hurricane Center. It was very heavy too. And those things have shown the Cayman Islands that it is important to have robust residents for the weather service. The weather service has got to be in a place where it can operate through anything. So that is one of the things I would urge the government right now to look at, to build a secure home for the weather service. Because we now have important tools. We have the radar. The radar is worth about £5 million, right? And we cannot keep that in a building which we know is going to go, right? We have good equipment, which is very hard to translate or move to another destination when the hurricane comes. So we have to have a residence that is robust, where we can work from and where the service can afford to continue informing people. Because before Ivan and before Gilbert, a lot of people came and thought, oh, Cayman is blessed, we'll never get a hurricane. Right? We'll never get a hurricane. And I tell them, we are at the juncture in the hurricane belt where just about every storm crosses our area. We are just lucky that the storms go a little further from us. But this is the intersection before we enter the Gulf of Mexico. So, this is what I have to say about Ivan. Ivan was a wake-up example, and it was very bad, but it is not the worst we can get. So it pays to be prepared.
And I always remember that it will remain with me until I go down here. Fred's words in most of the meetings that we had pre-Ivan, and I'm sure he continued it onward. It is not a matter of if we're going to get hit, but when. So that takes us right to keep the preparations current and keep improving them. Now also, in this whole scenario, the shelters come into play, very much so, with providing shelter for some of those folks who are in low-lying areas and some who are whose shelter may not hold up. And this is where Mrs. Diana Lopoi comes in, and she'll tell us a little bit about how that went.
Thanks, Dr. Thanks, Loxley. By the time Ivan came, I had already spent about 10 years in the department. Miss Jen had me well trained, well versed in everything because she was there long before me. I would say that there is always room for improvement, but I must also admit that I think we had a very good shelter plan, and it worked. I thought it worked quite well. There were challenges, but I think for the most part it worked well. And unlike some of the other agencies, we need to appreciate that shelter operations has to start work as early as January. Because the first thing we do is to update our plan. We look at the plan, see what didn't work last year, we update that plan. Then we have to advertise, recruit wardens, and train them. And by the time Ivan came, we were quite popular. We got around 100 persons to train. That really helped us out, and we have maintained those numbers. So we had, at the start, we had adequate numbers. Because it was so long, sheltering was so long, we ran into the difficulties later on. So we train our wardens, we have to order supplies. We have to get the storerooms cleaned up, all the shelters. Most of them are schools, school buildings, or the halls. But we have a room there that is our room, and we have to keep telling the schools and reminding them that this room belongs to shelter operations, because sometimes we see where things are missing and they tamper with and so on. So we get that room ready, we get all the things ready for the chief warden in the shelter, we order the stuff to go in there, essential store, and then we also have to order larger storage stuff for post-disaster. So we place orders with the supermarkets, all the supermarkets really, some of the wholesales, and so we place substantial quantities of goods. And we have our list compiled of the really essential things. Not luxuries, but things that people can eat, canned food and sanitary things and bleach and all the different stuff. So we have those on pallets in the supermarkets for 6 months, for the whole duration of the season. They rotate them because you can't expect the supermarket to put these things down and then they spoil. So they rotate them. But at any time during the season that we call supermarket, we know that our supplies are there. And at the last phase of the hurricane, we call them when things are getting really bad. We call supermarkets and they deliver the goods. Now, it isn't every single shelter that has sufficient storage space to store that quantity of goods. So we have specific ones in the different districts. One of the things that I can remember having a lot of talk with Loxley, was always trying to get Jen and myself on the radio, to talk to the people, tell them to move. I remember the last day really, when I went in there, he grabbed onto me and Paddy Banks, said, come on, turn on the TV, tell these people, you know the dangers here, tell them to move. Unfortunately, a lot of these people didn't move. Our records indicated that most of the people came to the shelter at 10 p.m. The storm was raging. It was raging then. And that posed tremendous difficulties for the shelter managers, because according to our rules, we are not really supposed to open the doors. So the call was really that of the shelter warden, shelter manager, to decide whether he or she would let people in. We had busloads of people coming from the hotels. Remember this hotel in particular sent 1 or 2 buses of people who had refused to live on the planes, or probably couldn't get out. So, you have to make a judgment call. Are you going to leave them to perish, or are you going to in a way, endanger the people inside the shelter and take them in. So the wardens and their teams had to do the best they could and manage that as carefully as they could. Now, the shelters are pretty strictly managed because we have a multidisciplinary team. We have people from environmental health, we have a policeman, we have people from health services. We have a whole team of persons in the shelter. But remember, we have regular shelters and we also have emergency medical shelters. So that was where we would send people who we know are ill. And also, I remember our Prospect School. It was such a coincidence. The school had opened for the first time the day before. So I remember Jen and I going down there and taking a quick walk through and calling the supermarkets, ordering the essential store. And luckily, the principal of the school decided to work hand in hand with us because he wanted to protect his new school too. So we were fortunate that we had that facility because that could house, I think it was up to like 800 or 1,000 persons. So that one came on stream immediately. We also have several pieces of information, books and forms and so forth, that we use in the sheltering. And one tool I want to mention is the register. When people come in, they have to register. They have to put down their skills because we have to use those skills if we need them in the shelter. And that did occur. For example, I can remember Jen and myself receiving calls from East End and North Side Shelter telling us that the doors were coming off, the windows were coming off, the shutters were coming off. Luckily, they had carpenters in there and they could identify those people who were able to remove doors from the interior and put them where that exterior door was. Maybe it wasn't as strong, but it was at least some makeshift mechanism of preventing the heavy winds from coming in. So, and then, as I said, we had our challenges. We let people know that they have to keep the shelter clean. We try to keep people, the shelteries, in an area, like families, that protect their stuff. When we train our wardens, the first thing we train in is personal preparedness, because it is important for them to prepare their homes and their families before they leave, because their families are not going to see them. So they take care of home first and then they report. And this is done right across the island. We have rules in the shelters and we ensure that our wardens understand fully that they have to be strict. Because the challenge is that we had people, and we'll always have people, who want to break the rules. They want to leave the shelter and come back midnight, and the shelter closes at 10. People want different types of food. Can't do that. We have a couple of hundred people in the shelter, you eat what you get. Luckily for us, during Ireland, we had quite a few chefs from the hotels who were sheltering with us, and we put them in charge of the kitchen. So they were able to help us prepare the meals and that sort of thing. And what I observed, but they themselves were quite strict, because remember, everything was down. The meat places that sold meat for sale and so they were trying to give us things to feed people. But those chefs looked at those goods carefully first and made sure that they were in a good condition before they cooked anything. And there was a lot that we dumped. We had to dump a lot of it. And environmental health would also inspect the food that we had there. But the shelters are run under strict and stringent methods. And the wardens are well trained. By the time they get in that shelter, they're well trained. And luckily for us, we have wardens who have served us for many, many years, and they keep coming back. And a lot of those wardens, their homes were damaged, but they were so loyal, they never left. They just assumed that their other family members, if they weren't in the shelter, would take care. So some of them were there like for a week or two before they even went home. But for the most part, I would say that we did pretty well. We worked with the service clubs to renovate homes for elderly people so we could put them back in. the people at the Pines came under our became a responsibility of ours, and we had to make a kind of makeshift hospital home for them because the Pines was destroyed, and I remember Max and all the people he could gather were renovating a hotel, the one that houses Cayman Airways now, to be a home for all the elderly people. There were things that I would wish I could forget, like some of the people who brought their family members and they didn't take them back. Some of those persons are still in our care, in our homes. They just used it as a means of getting rid of them, dumping them. The numbers weren't large, but it was so inhumane. I said to Orit a while ago that I'm not a civil servant now, and everybody knows I'm controversial. So there are one or two things I'm going to say. I feel that in the event of a disaster, the governance should remain in place. There were times when heads of departments were undermined and it worked out worse. And I can think of assessment. We went ahead as a department because that's our expertise, to assess people in the shelters. And eventually we had started to assess the general public too. And eventually, very soon it was taken away from us, and we were told to give our forms in, and they were altered tremendously. So when ECLAC came on the scene, they could not use the information that was gathered on those forms. The information that they used was what our department had produced, and that instrument was developed by our department in conjunction with Public Works. So those are some of the things that we have to be careful of. You have heads of departments in place, they've been there for years, their experience, leave them, support them, and let them do their work, because they know what to do. So I'll end on that note. Thank you very much.
Mentioned the Prospect shelter. I believe that was the last one to close down Post Island.
East End shelter. Yes.
But I know the Prospect.
We had to, as the shelters got, as the crowds got smaller, we kept combining shelters and eventually put everybody in East End, because we were trying to return the buildings to education so they could get ready for school. East End closed the 22nd of December.
I recall there was a lot of drama at the Prospect during that time.
Prospect was known as the Ritz-Carlton of the shelters, and all the senior civil servants were
Lots
there.
of folks.
And we put them to work to run the shelter.
She made reference to political, and as I mentioned before, wherever you go, it's going to be there. And we segue right into Mr. Art Connell, who was Cabinet Secretary at the time, of Ireland. And I'm not sure how much you'll be able to share with us. But we'll let him talk to us now about some of the political aspects of pre-Island and post-Island and during Island.
Thank you.
Art?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Can you hear me?
How is this now? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Locksley mentioned the fact that I was Cabinet Secretary at the time, and I was fortunate, whether we can put on before that, to have been appointed Cabinet Secretary in September of 2003. So I was in the post only for a year at that point in time. But whatever I know, I can certainly tell you about it, because I'm retired now, so they can't do anything. But I'm getting my pension. But just to highlight the magnitude of the disaster and how people felt about it, when you see a governor sit in cabinet and tears actually come to his eyes when he has to discuss the level of the destruction, then you know basically what it was like, and that certainly was the case. I want to discuss basically progress in disaster management after Hurricane Ivan from the government's perspective more than anything else. Number one, to point out that, and you've heard this already this afternoon, better forecasting and analysis. And of course, we've credited the European Union with providing us with the funds and the expertise, as well as the Caribbean Meteorological Organization for providing us with the technical expertise as well to construct the Doppler radar that we have now, which gives us real-time forecasting and everything else. So we have that at this point in time. We heard Ms. McCloy talk about ECLAC and having the relevant information, for them. And we have been preached about, lectured about, ensuring that we compiled our information and statistics in such a way that we can share them with persons. We encountered that difficulty after Hurricane Ivan. I believe that is resolved now. I don't know if we have anyone here from the Economics and Statistics Unit, or whether or not we have anyone during the period to talk about that, but that is essentially important because we want to have the relevant information to give donor organizations as well as to know ourselves the extent of the damage that we have received. Also, we saw the creation of asset management Cayman Islands as a result of Hurricane Ivan. That is in place, and we see the results of that in the form of this symposium here today as well. They have to be credited for the strides that they have made so far and that they will continue to make in terms of disaster management in Cayman Islands. And we also want to bear in mind the fact that it's not only related to hurricanes, even though we're now celebrating the anniversary of Hurricane Ivan, but to all other natural disasters as well as possible man-made ones also. While we talk about progress, there's also been a lack of progress in some areas. I keep hammering home the absence of a dedicated disaster fund. Despite the fact that we have an environmental fund or an environmental protection fund, which we can possibly tap into, and that is always sacrosanct in terms of what we can use it for, we need to have a dedicated fund for disaster management, in addition to whatever insurance coverage that the government may have. We see now that government's finances are improving, and these are the times now that we should actually start to put something away, not just for a rainy day, but for a stormy day. We need it more for that than anything else. So that needs to be done as well. Because while it is a luxury that we don't have at this time, and we've heard persons talk about having to use funds from our annual budgets for various departments for the purpose, we don't want to have to continue to rely on having to use your budgets that have been dedicated to achieve certain goals for disaster management funds as well. So once we start to build up our reserves, we need to ensure that we have something put away that we can properly manage our finances. We see, for instance, $5 million were given to Caribbean Development Bank to assist in the rebuilding process, meaning you had to assess individuals, and individuals were eligible to get up to $15,000 for repairs. We saw huge efforts in terms of getting people just dried in, those persons who lost their roofs and everything else, just getting them dried in. It takes a lot of money, and we should never ever forget the fact that everyone considers the Cayman Islands, and sometimes we're our own enemy because we keep referring to the fact that we're a rich nation, that our GDP is way up there. So when it comes time get funding from international organizations, it is very difficult because what do they look at? They look at your GDP to see what you have. So it becomes very difficult. So we have to ensure that we're more self-reliant than anything else. Following any major disaster, there needs to be a dedicated recovery manager, and you would have heard in my bio that I was also appointed as the recovery manager by cabinet. And I must confess, it had nothing to do with my skills as a recovery manager, but more so to be a liaison between the cabinet and the disaster management agencies that had been hired by the government to assist us in our recovery. And that would have been in the form of James Lee Witt and Associates, who's a former FEMA director, and of course MC Restoration, the company that the Cayman Islands government contracted with to do the cleanup work as well. So I was the liaison between those two entities, as well as the liaison with our non-governmental agencies here in the Cayman Islands, in particular the Chamber of Commerce, because there were so many efforts needed to be underway to get the private sector up and running as well as to get government. One of the things that I want to mention, and this may not have anything to do with it, but in our discussions, we also have to bear in mind that there are competing interests in the aftermath of a hurricane. There are the financial interests, and then there are the humanitarian interests, and we can't ignore one for the other. We have to be able to do a balancing act to ensure that those who are vulnerable in terms of their lives and their safety are just as much protected as our economic base, which is our financial and our tourism sector. So we have to ensure that we do that. I think the government did an excellent job in doing that once it was brought to their attention that you cannot just focus on central Georgetown and the banking community and the business community in terms of getting electrical power to them. There are other areas, and water as well, there are other areas that need that assistance also. So that is also important. We also have to better equip our various government agencies to be better positioned to respond in the aftermath of a hurricane. For instance, the Public Works Department, DBES, DEOH. We have to ensure now that they have the right equipment, that they're able to position their equipment in such a way that they sustain as little or no damage, as little damage as possible or no damage, and that they're up and running. You saw after Hurricane Ivan, for instance, DEOH, the recovery operation, and the relevant ministry was able to fund grab trucks and other essential equipment, tub grinders, open, what do they call it again? Open curtain burners, for them to be able to dispose of a lot of the debris. They didn't have the funds themselves, which brings me back again to the point that we need to have that dedicated fund for that purpose if we don't have our various entities properly equipped for that. Dr. Carvey talked about CRIP, and we saw the government move forward in purchasing additional insurance. I was fortunate to accompany the then leader of government business, Mr. Kurt Tibbetts, to a conference in London where we were first introduced to this insurance facility that was being offered by the World Bank. And at that time, I think the premium was $1 million US, and we subscribed to that. There was vacillation between governments after that as to whether or not we should continue to subscribe to that facility, and I believe that it is money well spent. Most people will refer to insurance as a gamble. It's a bet between you and the insurance company. You're betting that something is going to happen, and the insurance company is betting that something is not going to happen. This facility is slightly different because it's all funded by the member countries paying their premiums as well as funding from the World Bank. And I spoke earlier about the rebuilding effort by Cayman Islands Development Bank. So we have to ensure that all of our government agencies are up to par. And my final note and observation would be that we don't want to put government agencies in a position where they're competing against each other. After a disaster, there needs to be a collaborative effort in terms of a recovery. So we want to ensure that all entities are working on the same plane. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bonner, and what you've heard from this panel this afternoon, you can appreciate all of the elements that go into preparedness and recovery. And hazard management, this did provide me with, I think, some 37 points that I want to cover in this discussion, but you know, we won't be able to cover all of them, but we can still get to some of them. And Mr. Sambu wanted to add something here on, you forgot? Okay.
No, I just want to say that since Hurricane Ida, we saw that Hurricane Ida was coming from the east and it damaged Jamaica, which was responsible for providing us with warnings. And ever since Jamaica got damaged, then we did not get any warnings. We had to rely on ourselves. So we took that opportunity, therefore, to go to the World Meteorological Organization, because in this part of the world is split up into 4 different regional associations. In this part of the world, a place does not automatically become responsible for itself. It's through the permission that we get from the World Meteorological Organization. So we went to the World Meteorological Organization and told them that we wanted to have Cayman as a standalone station. For instance, in my slide, you see Antigua and Barbuda. You see Barbados is responsible for issuing warnings for St. Vincent and the Grenadines and things like that. Jamaica was responsible for issuing warnings for us. But seeing that the storms came from east, they affect Jamaica first. We said, no way. So the following year was a meeting of the World Meteorological Organization. We made representation there, and we got that permission. So that Cayman is now responsible for issuing its own warning. I just want to tell you all that the hurricane season, thankfully, has been very slow. It has not been active, and that is forecast. But we are entering into the really, but we are the peak as of tomorrow, is a peak. But we enter into the part of the season where storms form closer to us. They come from Central America and they come across. That is the way Alona came. We may not have, it only takes one storm. It doesn't have to be an active season or an inactive season. This is always my point. It only takes one. So we must still be very prepared, because now they're going to form closer to us and we may not have the length of time. So this is all I have to say. Thank you.
Another aspect in pre-preparations and post-recovery is, and it was mentioned here earlier, getting people off the island. And I see Richie standing back there, and he was mainly, I think, coordinating that area, along with Mr. Ebanks and some of the rest of us. But that is a very important area of preparedness for hurricanes, because sometimes, depending on when the hurricane comes, we may have 6,000-7,000 people on the island. And if we've got to add them to what we have here, then it becomes that much more difficult for us to cope with what occurs. And of course, having Cayman Airways, I say basically at our disposal, is a great help in that area. And the decision as to when to start evacuating these people, Mr. Eubanks will usually take that decision, and we get them off as fast as we can. Don, maybe you'd like to just speak briefly to that aspect.
Yeah, and I'll say, this whole issue of visitors and, it's always one of the most sensitive calls we had to make. Obviously, as a country, rely heavily on tourism. The tourism people don't want you to send out a message that you can't take any more visitors. And by the same token, we have to make an assessment of the window, the capacity, and decide, when the numbers suggest that with what we have here already, what we expect we can get out. And the numbers tend to say it's time to stop letting people come in. Those are difficult calls. You don't want to blow it. You certainly, on the one hand, you hope the system will go away. You don't want to have turn away visitors and ended up with no adverse weather conditions. But those are decisions we made every time we were threatened, and we just made the best judgment that we could. In the case of Ivan, I recall Ivan slowed down a bit, and our window ended up being a bit bigger than we expected. We were able to get more flights out on Saturday. While we thought we probably would have gotten a couple of the morning, we were able to continue to get until the afternoon. I just want to mention one other thing in relation to Cayman Airways and obviously the tremendous value that they are and their performance in those situations. We must all understand that Cayman Airways and none of those occasions would have operated in weather conditions that weren't appropriate to operate, and weather conditions that other carriers could not have also operated in as well. So at no time did we put anybody at risk by Cayman Airways still operating when it's in the matter of policy and commitment, and whether we can secure another level of commitment or commitment from another source that is as effective as Cayman Airways. It's one of those things, and like all other things that are going on now as we look to decide how long can we carry spend $1 million a year insurance policy, which Cayman Airways to some extent did. The other great value with them, of course, was, I just quickly say, was post Ivan. Post-Ivan, we had a situation where we had an airport to get operational, and Richards to be commended for dropping one school to close, which he had started a few years before, regulating air transport under the Civil Aviation Authority, and picking up with the old school to close of running the Airports Authority, which is what we needed at the time. And credit is to him to put the airport back up and going, and get traffic back in line. Cayman Airways stepped up to the plate big time. I remember it was one of those decisions that you take. I think it was a Bobby Kirkland, Richard, Mike Adams, and myself standing in a room in the fire service, and we said, Mike, can you take people out of here for us for free? We need to get mothers and children out. And he said, sure, I can. I said, like, I started. And that's how the decision was taken and put in the effect to start airlifting as soon as we could. Mothers and children, because obviously we needed to relieve the community of people who couldn't contribute, and who would be better off in another environment. The U.S. authorities were very helpful with that. They were, people like France got in contact with them, and they were willing to let people in whether they had documents or didn't have documents. So that was just, I guess the airlift side of the thing.
Thank you, Mr. Ebanks. And one of the points that other men want to get covered was the operational center, that is the National Emergency Operational Center, and that was all contained at the fire station. And again, Mr. Ebanks and Kirkland was, they were the guidance down there. And if you weren't there, if you couldn't be there, you would never imagine post-Island, Sam was there, the stress that was contained within those walls down there in that operational center. Joel was there part of the time also. And
can I make a contribution if I may? I'm Gary Benham, I'm head of the Governor's Office now here in 2014. I just wanted to pick up on something Mr. Ebanks. Can I just say that I thought the whole panel discussion
7 seconds.
has been brilliant. Take the mic. I think the panel discussion has been really enlightening for me. I have heard the stories about the fire station that scared me, given that that's one of my locations if anything was to happen. But I just wanted to endorse what Mr. Ebanks was saying, because in 2005 I was the head of a consular team in London, and we knew that Hurricane Wilma was going to hit the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, where 3,500 Brits were on holiday. And it's about the airlines. Now, they kept flying people in until the storm hit, and the reason they did that was because if they stopped flying, they become liable to their people that have booked, paid their tickets, cost them a lot of money. What they were waiting for is the British government to say, we now authorise no further travel, and that's what will be the trigger to stop and therefore take liability away from here. And I think that communication between here and, in this case, London, would be absolutely critical. And I think the lessons that we all explained, I think go a long way to endorsing that. So I'm really grateful for being here, and thank you for your wisdom.
Thank you for that. And
But I mean, in our case, we take the decision that we're not allowing you to come.
Absolutely.
I mean, it isn't the originating country to say you're not leaving there. We say you're not coming here.
Yeah.
And it does cost you capacity, because if you tell Americans, for example, that you can bring down 200 people, then obviously they're not going to send the fly down with the 10 or 15 Caymanians who we would have loved to come and take back out 250 visitors. So that's the price you pay. But unless you stop the inflow, there's no way that you're going to be able to manage the outcome.
And again, we talked a bit about the emergency center, what took place down there that afternoon. And another element that is very, very important in preparedness and post-disaster recovery is communications. And I think Radio Cayman played an important role in that aspect. Actually, we were up, I think that Monday afternoon, after the hurricane, I know the all prayer wasn't good, but anyway, we got back up and were able to disseminate information from, a myriad of important aspects that started to deal with recovery. And of course, that's when the Kaka thing came in. I'll just relate that to you quickly in 70 seconds. Dr. Kumar handed me a handwritten thing, giving instructions on what happens if you Kaka. That was the word he used. I didn't come and think of it. When I saw it, I said, who can understand this? I said, I better put this in simple language. the thing about it, you know, a little humor sometimes creeps in without you even thinking about it. But I've had so many people tell me after that, say, you know, I was sitting there with my jaws as tight as I couldn't even smile. And he said, when that came up, I smiled and I said, you know, we're going to be all right. But, you know, the communication element is very important. I know Joel used to sit with Inspector Haynes there every morning and post-Ivan giving a report on what happened the night before, because as you well know, post-Ivan there was some looting and so forth and so on. The cover was kept on it. In other words, it didn't last very long. And the community, knowing that everything is going along smoothly, plays a very important role in post-recovery. And hazard management, I think, has been doing a great job in moving this whole thing forward, improving the whole process. And that was started, as I mentioned, right before Gilbert. And I'll give each panel a few seconds to just wrap up anything that they'd like to say, if they'd like to. Donnie, anything you'd like to add?
I'll say, I mean, obviously, I know it was I think I said earlier, it was a life-changing, a redefining experience. I take Fred's point, it doesn't mean it's the worst that we can have, but certainly it was more severe than anybody who was around at the time of their experience. And, you know, there were tremendous lessons to be learned from it. We need to keep those lessons alive. We need to keep reminding people of the more graphic extent of the damage, just so people don't lose focus of what could happen. We talked quite a bit about shelters today, and obviously I think Leanne did a tremendous job. And I've said before, my involvement was always made easy and fulfilling by having wonderful people like them and others in the National Hurricane Committee to work with. But on the shelter area, the one thing that I would perhaps want to say is that, you know, we still, unfortunately, why we have a good building code, we lack the control on openings. In other words, windows and doors. We can build a $50,000 house or a $500,000 house, but there's still no requirement that you have hurricane shutters or you have a window that's impact resistant. It's one of the weaknesses. I gather it's to be addressed. I hope it will. I gather it will also be putting in a requirement for the adhesive membrane coverings on roofs, or the typical called ice and water shield, was just such a wonderful job. In the event that you lose shingles, you use loose tiles, you use some other form of roofing, it still gives you water protection. And obviously a lot of our damage was caused by the water, including messing up drywall, messing up furniture, and all these other things. Those are things that hopefully will come along. They're not expensive. They're not, you know. I said earlier, I think in talking to kids, it's just like having seatbelts. You know, we until we put a law in place, people didn't buckle seatbelts. You know, seatbelts in the car. We can easily afford a couple of $100 it is to have shutters in buildings. I really like to see our focus going forward be not on expanding shelter capacity in terms of institutional buildings. You know, if we're building something and the building can start out function fine, but building shelters as purpose-built, curative shelters isn't, I think, the direction we need to be going with the capacity we now have. What I'd like to see us focusing on is trying to elevate that percentage of residences that people can remain in and be safe. And we can do that by improving standards, going forward, having more resilient buildings, and we can do that by incentivizing people to retrofit the weaknesses in their existing buildings. So we can go from 60% of people should be able to stay in their home to 70%, to 75%, to 80%, then that to me is real progress. I'll leave you with that.
Dr. Van Newton?
Yes, I would just like to close by saying, you know, reminiscing about Ireland is good and bad, but mainly the good memories are there where people worked together, we came together and we did what needed to be done in this country. I was very proud to work with everyone around this table and many of you out there. Going forward, I also would like to say that under my responsibilities as Chairman of Utilities and Communications Subcommittee for HMCI, I feel very confident that the utilities for communications such as line, Digicel, etc., are much stronger and harder built to provide us with hopefully better service in the event of a disaster. Dealing with the fuel companies, I think they have also put in place a stronger and maybe a bit more responsive action plan, as well as the water utility, Cayman Water Company is also very, very strong. And I just hope that we can face the rest of this hurricane season without too much drama, but we need to be prepared. And I encourage you and everybody else in your family, etc., to be prepared. Thank you.
Mr. Gordon?
Just 2 points. One, in this age of globalization, we still remain reliant on others for assistance. But we just want to remind everyone there's nothing like having your own. We want to encourage the government and the people of the Cayman Islands to continue to be as self-reliant as possible in as many areas as possible, and that will help us considerably. We've heard Fred Zambula talk about having their own home for with the National Weather Service, and I would subscribe to that as well, because Fred, there's nothing like you being in an emergency shelter or a center like the fire station and everyone looking at you and saying, Fred, when is this going to be over? When is it going to be over? You know, everyone is looking to you, and of course we know forecasting is an inexact science, and as a result anything can happen with a hurricane, but I know you were constantly bombarded with that question. When is it going to pass? What, you know, what's going to happen next? You know, so certainly we want to give support to them having their own home as well.
Was happy to hear Donnie's encouraging people to upgrade their own homes, because our population isn't as small as it was even then, and we only have so many shelter spaces and no more. So it would be really beneficial to persons themselves, families, and the country if people would retrofit their homes and make it up to a standard or a level that they could remain. And that was one of the things that Jen and I stressed. If you didn't need to come to the shelter, if you felt your home was secure, if you had family members who had sturdy homes, to remain there, because we knew we had limited shelter space. I would also support a purpose-built facility to house the team, because we were all bundled up there, trying to work as best we could for weeks and months, actually. And I think I got well a few times, right? Because some of the roof went off on that fire services building. Yeah. I would also encourage more of our, I would have to say, Caymanian people to become shelter wardens, because we have a large number, but we lack in our own people doing it. We all have to make the sacrifice. It's their country starts, it's their families. So I would appeal to Caymanian people, when I say all the different types of Caymanians, to step up to the plate, come out and get trained, and help your country. Thank you very much.
So?
Well, we are now at a state where we can outline better warnings. But we can't tell everybody the storm is going to hit so-and-so place, so-and-so time, this week. What I would appreciate people doing is listen to your local weather service. Do not be going out listening to a station in Miami, something from Houston, and coming back and telling us this is what they say. Because that in no way prepares people in the Cayman Islands. the effect of a storm on Cayman Islands can only be gotten from the people who know the place, the geography of it, right? And have a good idea of the storm. Because we have seen storms coming like they're going to come to Cayman direct. And this is one of the benefits of being small. You get easily missed. But if it hits you, you have serious problems. So I urge everybody to carry out this message. Listen to your local water service. We now have advanced capabilities, right? We can spot the storm from about 400 miles away, right? We can give you a blow-by-blow commentary on the storm as it comes into our area. As a matter of fact, as I mentioned earlier, the Hurricane Center now relies on us to give them the information on the storm because we have a radar to see it. Okay? We cannot tell you exactly where the storm will make landfall. But the warning is still not precise. But we have gotten a lot better than, say, 25 or 50 years ago. The Hurricane Center itself has shortened the period of warning and watches because we have gotten more precise. But anyway, we have all got to look out and be prepared to take action when a storm is approaching us. Thank you.
Okay, it's just left for me to thank the panel for their contribution and to say that I think a purpose-built weather service station and also the hazard management purpose-built building to house all that is probably one of the greatest necessities in relation to hurricane preparedness, disaster preparedness, and post whatever needs to be done. So with that, we'll say thank you all for coming and hope that you'll take the information and spread it to your neighbors and sing it on Sunday afternoons, Saturday afternoons, anytime you feel like it. Thank you again.